The University of Idaho says the home where 4 students were murdered back in November of last year, that home will be demolished. In a memo sent to the University of Idaho students and employees this morning, the owner of the home on King Street offered to give the home to the university, which they did accept. They say the demolition removes efforts to further sensationalize the crime scene. They also say they are currently evaluating options on what to do with the property after the home is torn down.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Look closely and you'll see the funhouse right now at 1122 King Road has been closed off, actually fenced off. Now all that remains is a boarded up empty shell surrounded by a chain link fence and no trespassing signs. But actually even less than that. They have now announced that they are going to demolish the house, and there's no indication what's going to be in its place, if anything's going to be in its place. And isn't that a sad aftermath, a sad legacy to all of this? We may take an idle, perfunctory interest in the fact of this house, right? You might say, oh, that's interesting. But I want you to consider how what was once a vital epicenter to student life in Moscow. I think the last time there was a party in that house was a Friday night, the 11th of November, and there were about 150 kids apparently there, right? A place where there was a lot of joy, a lot of memories, a lot of fun, a lot of happiness. As I say, a vital epicenter to student life in Moscow. And what has happened to it? It's basically been surgically removed, almost like a transplant, except the surgery is in a 6-month legal limbo, with no guarantee that the heart is ever going to be replaced, or if it is, that the patient will fully recover from it. And the fact that this house is now going to be basically torn down, basically just sort of excised, almost like lanced like a boil, kind of gives you a sense that this isn't the kind of tragedy that you can recover from, certainly not with that reminder hulking in that area, attracting people from around the world. And if you think about it, the Idaho killer wanted this. He may not have anticipated this outcome, but this is exactly what he wanted. He wanted to destroy as many lives as he could, and his work is still rippling outward. The ripple effect of that wanton destruction is still spreading. It started as a shockwave, more kind of an informational shockwave, than as a sort of psychological pandemic. And so the idea to constrain it, to contain it, is to literally raise down this building. And so the aftermath for what happened there at 1122 King Road was anxiety, fear, distrust, disinvestment, all germinating in the hollow aftermath of this crime. And I think you've got to, in a way, recognize that all of those things, the anxiety, the fear, the distrust, was present in the perpetrator as well. And then when he committed this crime, it was like a bomb of negative energy exploding. And that negative energy was picked up, played into, plied by, to some extent, social media. And so I've got a question you don't often hear about in the mainstream media during developing stories while they're evolving, especially in stories involving crime, and even less in social media. Social media often pretends to be tasked with championing the cause, our cause, society's interest in a particular case. How do we feel about something? It's a question that goes beyond the idle but insatiable curiosity of what happened. And the question is, what impact is the coverage of the crime having on the community it is supposedly intended to serve? Supposedly this coverage we're providing is intended to serve the community that has been impacted. Well, has it been? Is it protecting anyone's privacy? Is it serving anyone's interests? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. By the way, I've also set up a side channel called Team Peachtree, which is a sort of channel that is affirmative, got an affirmative message. It's about travel, food, fitness, and believe it or not, the affirming message of Vincent van Gogh as well. So please subscribe to that channel as well. I'll put a link to that in the description. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So think about this, the original idea with journalism and the mainstream media was to serve the greater good, to render a public service, to inform the public, right? And it's kind of become, in a way, something else, hasn't it? Freedom of information trumps all, does it? Should this idea that we have the right to information trump literally everything else? And you have a situation here where that right has led to the owner of this property literally giving it up, basically deciding it's worthless.
And this isn't the way justice, is prosecuted in this country. I'm frustrated by the amount of darkness, especially in Idaho, in these last two cases we just reported on. Should we be concerned, or is this really just prudent?
Believe me, as someone who covers true crime, I'm also interested in information. I'm also interested in knowing what we should be allowed to know. But does freedom of information really trump everything else? What about those who live in the area? What about the man who owns the house, or the kids who lived in it, that survived all of this, or the future kids who might have wanted to live in it? If DNB were perhaps silent about certain things that were going on because they wanted their adventure in that house to continue, not something that was very likely, but perhaps they'd felt, I just want to have my experience here. I don't want, as horrible as something may have been, I don't want that to be taken away from me. Well, it has been. This crime in Moscow, Idaho, has torn a hole through the fabric of society. And what they're trying to do is heal that hole. Not just, and one of the ways they're thinking about doing that is by removing this almost grim tourist attraction, this thing that people can come to and create content out of photographing the house and, presenting themselves in front of the house. And, the thing to bear in mind is you have crimes all the time, and you have tears in the fabric of society all the time. But this is not just any society. And so when you're demanding information, as people did in the Kylie Rodney case, think about the society you're talking about. You're dealing with a young society, a delicate situation with young lives that are in their sort of formative years. This is a society of college kids. Do they deserve any kind of extra protection? And the media might not think so, and social media might not think so, and if you're not from Moscow, you may not think so. But what if you had a kid in that college? What if you were a kid in that college? And so I think the ongoing coverage, such as it is, and I'm going to deal with some aspects of that coverage, the witch hunting, the blame gaming, what it does is it's basically taking what Brian did, right? What Brian allegedly did, what the perpetrator allegedly did, and extending that damage through the beating heart of the fraternities living side by side, waking up each morning and seeing that gash, a suburban gash in their personal living space, in their neighborhood, in their environment. It's a wound. So what I'm saying is the perpetrator created this original injury, and it's a wound, it's a scar on the community. And scars can heal, but will that house ever be itself again? Will it be sold for its fair value? And now we found out that it won't be. And so just this idea that this house becomes worthless, this house that used to be a home, used to be a sanctum, in some of the very last posts that Kaylee put up, you kind of get the idea that this was the time, she was having the time of her life. Some of the best memories in her entire life were inside that house. And so no one else is going to be able to have memories like that. And so you can start to feel the loss then. You can begin to intuit the aggregating cost of this crime. It's not just the lives that are lost. It's not just the future kids that can't go there. It's actually the house itself has become worthless. Why? And so what we see is that the social aftermaths, not something often spoken about in true crime, can involve a social cost, and does social media help ameliorate, improve, soothe, heal those wounds, or does it actually aggravate them? Does it create more suspicion? Don't trust the police, turn every person in that community into a suspect? Do you think social media is a salve to those tears in the fabric of society? So if there is a social cost to this particular crime, the students are the ones feeling it. The students are experiencing it. They are real people in a real place, and their pain is real. Their loss is real. And social media seems to be concerned about pain and injury. I mean, in terms of the whole true crime community. Oh, someone was murdered. It really bothers me that someone was injured or killed. We're really concerned about it. We really need to investigate this. Well, what about when you are the one inflicting it? When you're the one inflicting pain and injury, are they then that concerned about it? And I think we should be. According to the Inlander, quote, I met with Spencer in the Argonauts campus. That's Abigail Spencer, the news editor for the Argonaut. That's the University of Idaho's student newspaper. And this is a young woman who wants to pursue a career in journalism, right? After she graduates, she wants to become a journalist. And her experience in Moscow, Idaho, has kind of given her a new perspective, according to this article, on journalism. And it's not been a positive one. And so Abigail has provided a little insight into her view of what has happened. She said, in general, there's a lack of sensitivity. I'm seeing a lack of sensitivity. Someone has been murdered, and I'm actually seeing the response isn't very sensitive. And she's referring to the national media, according to the article, parachuting into the campus, shoving cameras into students' faces. That's one dimension. She also says she knows multiple people who've been accused by the online mobs, right? One friend, so personally knowing people, she says one friend was targeted by internet sleuths because he drives a white car. That was enough to basically accuse someone of quadruple murder. Oh, I see you drive a white car. You must be the murderer. And that person wasn't even in town on the day of the murder. So can you think about what loss, what cost is inflicted on that person? It's an innocent victim added to all the other innocent victims. And according to Abigail, he still had to lock down all of his social media to ride out that storm. According to Abigail, she says the attention has made her fellow students suspicious of the media. Thanks a lot, True Crime. Thanks a lot for making people suspicious of everyone around them, suspicious of the media, wary of giving interviews. And they were right to feel wary. And also aware of an online frenzy. She says that some classmates have taken to social media to push back on the speculation, reminding people online that Moscow is a place where real people live. It's not a stereotypical small town, according to the article. It's not some sort of hypothetical place torn apart by tragedy. According to Abigail, she says, this isn't Riverdale. This is a real place. And she goes on to say, or the article goes on to say, there seems to be a need to assign a narrative and meaning to every act of senseless violence. But the problem is that when you try to do that, when you, especially from the outside coming in, trying to assign a narrative, that can distort reality. It can lead people, according to the article, in search of answers that don't exist. The article, I will put a link to it in the description from the Inlander. It refers to the true-crimification of the Moscow homicides. And you've seen the same true-crimification of the Nicola Bully case. It's a negative cloud that is associated with that. And anyway, Brandon Schrand, he was traveling for a conference in Texas when he heard the news, according to this article. Schrand works at Washington State University, where Kohberger attended, where Brian Kohberger was. But he also spent a decade teaching creative writing at the University of Idaho. He still has strong ties to the area, and his son actually met one of the victims through a fraternity connection. And it is Brandon Schrand that says, we're socially conditioned to think that murders can be solved in 25 minutes, like 25 minutes of television. And he says, the reality is these things are wildly complex. And that's something I repeat over and over again in my analysis. What is real here? Aren't we losing track of reality? Aren't things a little bit more complicated? They seem to be incredibly simple in social media, but isn't the reality a lot more complicated? Isn't there a fabric of a community going on that we totally unaware of? Aren't there dynamics going on that are also complicated and backstories that are sort of weaving together that we need to catch up on, right? And some might call the insatiable thirst we sometimes see in the true crime content machine, some might call that a bloodlust of its own, where every gory, grisly detail is examined, but with the social cost neatly excised out of the analysis. Well, I want you to look at this picture, and I want you to silently see the social cost after all of that cacophony, after all of those rumors and so on. And ask yourself, is our participation in this good? Is my participation good? Is yours? Is somebody else? So that we, in our effort to try and solve cases, we are also self-aware of damage that we might be doing. Are we truly caring? Are we truly sensitive? And I've got to say, when it looked like the case was sort of going away, and what I mean is, the trial is 6 months from now, I was actually content to say, I'll see you in 6 months. You know, we'll cover some of what comes out from there, but it is okay to let all of this go. And you've seen other news agencies insist on covering something every single day, despite there being a gag order, despite there being this need to preserve to some extent the integrity of the prosecution. You've just been seeing leaks and all sorts of things going on. And you might say, we have the right to that information. But if you live in Moscow and this is your community and you run the university, wouldn't you also feel that the students there have a right to their university experience? And if you were once a university student and something like this happened, would you want this in your face reminding you all the time as well? And so I've got a question. Do you mind if I ask this question? Aren't we losing our collective humanity? I would say if we aren't having this conversation, like the one I'm having right now here with you, if we aren't having this conversation, then we are. We are losing our collective humanity. Because the Kobergers of this world didn't step off an alien spacecraft. They came from this world. They came from our world. They are us. And if we're not careful, we're on the way to becoming them. And there's the rub. The question at the heart of all of this is, how much do we really care? How much do we genuinely care? When you look at this house, you look at the fact that this house, this structure has become a shell. The house itself is going to be destroyed as well. What sort of feeling does that leave you with? That someone commits a crime and on top of that crime is, I don't want to say the destruction of property, but something that was there, a home, that's destroyed as well. And I think the question that this asks is, isn't there a better way of dealing with high-profile cases where we try and not just have witch hunts and rumors and misinformation, but also we are sensitive to the people there, to protecting them, to looking after them, to the aftermath, and also respecting things like gag orders and respecting the fact that a trial is on the cards, and perhaps being a little bit more patient and agreeing to let things go for a while and let life resume for the people in that environment. And then I also think having conversations like this one, where we say, how did this come out of the fabric of society, and how do we try to find ways to heal society? Because that same substance, that same toxin that the humiliation that leads to someone having a bone to pick with somebody else. It's that same thing that is bullying people in a true crime context, accusing people unfairly, that really aggravates this wound that is in society to begin with. How do we heal it? Well, I think by looking at ourselves in the mirror, by caring and by showing we care in certain ways that are perhaps self-sacrificial, where we say, although I can benefit by doing this, I'm not going to. Although I could take advantage of this, I'm not going to, because I want to be part of the solution. Does that make sense? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.